Good afternoon, everybody. You know, like, I'd like to welcome you all to, the Startup September, you know, event for today, right? We have a very exciting speaker with us, right? Vignesh, who's part of Spoonfeed and has done, many investments. Is a very fascinating investor, you ask me. And I have an interesting conversation with him. And I'd like to really talk with him and understand how he makes his investments and so on. Hi Vignesh.
Hi, Varda. Thanks for having me. Thanks to all of you folks.
Sure. So let me just introduce myself. My name is Vardraj, and I'm part of the Head Start Chennai chapter. My daytime job is I work for a startup investment bank called iDrive Capital. We help with early stage startups, raise money for them and so on. Now to give a brief introduction about Vignesh, right? Vignesh is Spoonfeed's architect and primary driving force. He has had stints at Macquarie Capital and Ernst and Young. And he's also invested at both the fund level and in startups in India and the US. Vignesh is now leveraging both his capital and network to help them grow. Now he's back in India. He's making investments. Excited to have him as part of the ecosystem, right? Vignesh, his education background is he holds an MSc in finance from the from a prestigious school in France, Grenoble School of Management. Vignesh, I'm not going to attend the French
That's okay.
name of it.
That's all right.
He's also an alumnus of he's also an alumnus of the United World of College of Southeast Asia. Thanks, Vignesh. Thanks for being a part of Startup September.
Sure. Thanks again for having me.
Yeah. So, Vignesh, I want to know, like, how did you get into investing, right? What really brought you into, startup investing? I can see that you have a background in finance, right? But why specifically startup investing? How did you make your first investment? How did that happen?
So, honestly, didn't get into startup investing because I was looking for startups to invest in. It, I think, ended up being more of like a focus on. See, I was always somebody, even like from university days, school days, generally focused on like non-linear growth patterns. And the only two markets, I think, the time when I graduated high school or from college as well, were possibly venture capital as an asset class and maybe crypto as an asset class, right? Like, I mean, those are the only two things that were sort of super nascent markets being created at that point. Not really like there was no formal sort of structured way to invest in those markets back then. So I just felt like, if at all there was going to be a binary bet that was going to result in, non-linear growth and wealth creation, etc., at a personal level, VC startups. I mean, VC and crypto basically ended up being the only two options, realistically available. And I was based in Singapore at the time, so kind of like, technology. I mean, around the time I joined, work in Singapore at MacCap as well was when Facebook went public that year in 2012, right? So this whole sort of technology being the wow, factor in terms of, okay, this is where long-term value creation is going to be for the next 20, 25 years. That message was very clear.
Okay.
Even at the fact that, okay, like a company could start off from a garage and effectively scale all the way to go public. And so that entire sort of path was like, it was done and visible. It was the world's largest IPO at that point in time as well. So I guess, for me, it was like, how early on that chain can you get in? So that was about it.
Okay.
Does that answer the question?
Do you regret not being, probably getting into crypto now that you're in startup?
No, I don't regret not being in crypto because I am in crypto. So definitely don't regret something that I. No, yeah.
Sure. Yeah, very interesting. Tell me about your first investment, right? I'd like to know, like, what was, kind of like the first case, right? You'd have a lot of emotions. You would have went through everything, right? You would have felt a lot. in a sense when you wrote that first check, right?
Actually,
tell me about that.
Very honestly, it's the most undramatic, anticlimactic story as far as first investment, especially my first India investment is concerned, because so like while working in consulting or investment banking, generally like hours are pretty bad, right? Like, I mean, you spend a lot of time kind of going out, doing nothing else aside from working. So even if you call yourself an investor, it's largely like a money allocation play more than it is a time allocation play, because you don't have time to spend with founders, you don't have time to build relationships, you don't have time to kind of like, you know, assess a startup and really even do like first level due diligence. So my first real startup investment from an India standpoint, especially where I'm active, you know, obviously today, was Smiles.ai, which is a full stack dental care, you know, company. And the reason I said it was anticlimactic, and actually, unfortunately, didn't end up going through all those emotions that you just mentioned through that story, was because I moved to India in 2016 and spent 2 years actually just traveling, meeting people, and not really making investments, just learning and kind of like chatting people up and understanding what they were thinking and how they were thinking, and like understanding sort of how the maturity, the cadence of this startup environment, the VC landscape in India was going, or how it was happening, and only made that investment commitment to Smiles.ai in 2018. So like a good 2.5 years after I'd moved back, and kind of had at least first level ability to learn a little bit about this market.
Okay.
So yeah, sorry to disappoint you on the emotional front, but yeah, like it was the most like, I mean, I had the chance to, I mean, the privilege of working with, of course, Hitesh and Jatin, but also like kind of meeting Hitesh super early. So in a sense, like I kind of knew him when Smiles.ai was like an idea at that point, and you know, going through the sort of motions of understanding how he was thinking as a founder itself, like, you know, way back when, and because it was kind of like a very regular interaction and a kind of time that I spent with him as well, it wasn't like it, again, it was very little drama. It was a lot of productivity and a lot of course, you know, fun in terms of the, of course, the relationship that we share, and you know, the amazing stuff that he's doing, him and Jatin are doing at Smiles. But no kind of like emotional roller coaster associated with, oh my god, where's my capital gone, or whatever. Like, you know, it was, I mean, I was very informed about the business even at that stage.
Good. Okay. You know, you had a long journey, right, with investing. Just curious to know, how many investments you've made so far. How are they fared so far? What does your report card look like?
That is a question for probably you to answer, or the market to answer, or for like founders to come and, you know, tell me how they think I've done as an investor, honestly, more than it is for me to go and, you know, say, you know, this is what I've done. But look, I've been very lucky in the quality of people that I've met, the intellectual caliber, as well as the sort of the execution caliber of the people that I've met, the founders I've worked with. And over the last sort of, I mean, I kind of lost count exact number, but between India and the US and Singapore, direct investments alone would have been, over the last 2.5 years, at least 25, if not more than that. You know, so it's been I wouldn't say super active. I don't even know what is defined as active and what's not, and what's infrequent investing. But I mean, the thesis is just basically to meet great founders as often as possible, and hopefully, if they're willing to let me be part of the story, be a part of their stories as much as possible for as long as possible.
You know, typically VCs are saying they're looking at 100 startups and writing a single check, right? So annually, like, how many startups are you looking at? I want to understand, like, what does your investment process look like? And in terms of the funnel, in terms of how many startups you look and how many do you end up investing, right? How does that look like for you?
So this is really variable. Like, I can't really predict, you know, how many startups I'm going to meet in a given month or whatever. But if I would hazard a sort of thumb rule, given the data from just the last, let's say, 36 months, I don't know what, like maybe I'll meet 15, 20 startups a month easily. A lot of and the funnel is, again, there's been no conscious funnel building as far as the thesis from my perspective from an investment standpoint is concerned. But what has definitely been done is a conscious sort of benchmarking in terms of the quality of founders. And so a lot of the recommendations, a lot of the references, the introductions generally tend to happen from within the founder family, the founder network itself. And over time, that becomes a kind of self-fulfilling thing, right? Because if, ultimately, as in investing, as in life, I guess it's just, surrounding yourself with the right people and hopefully letting them guide you on the journey, to grow and kind of introduce you to other people that they think, you can grow together with, as opposed to just sort of trying to do everything on your own.
Okay.
Sorry, Varda, I think I'm losing you a little bit. There's a lot of like static and, not able to quite hear you.
Yeah. Okay. Just ping me, just let me know if it's bad.
Okay.
For the interest of the audience, right?
Sure.
I know largely I want to focus on the investor mindset, right? Because there's a lot of content in terms of evaluating startups. But I really want to get inside the mind of an investor, right? What is just before that, right? I know if I ask you what's your favorite investment, you're going to say all of your investments are going to be your favorite investments. But like, you're going to have one thing that you really enjoy doing, right? I want to know that. Which is their investment that you felt most good, when you wrote that check, and I've seen that investment really turn out really
well? Well, I guess, in terms of, honestly, that's a very difficult question to answer. Like, it's not a.
Yeah, I know.
It's like asking. If I didn't feel, forget good. If I didn't feel great, okay, like it wouldn't have been an investment in the first place, right? So, like, how would it would be unfair now to begin to put degrees to that greatness after the investment's already been made. But I guess what I'm really, honestly, let me kind of answer that question in a more horizontal way rather than a vertical way. The common thread that kind of defines all of the startup investments that at least I think I've made has been the consistent level of ambition, as well as the drive from the founders end to have an impact beyond just their companies. And I think that has been evident through the articulation that I've heard from pretty much, any founder in the companies I've been fortunate enough to invest in, because none of them are just sort of thinking limiting their thinking to just that particular company. Like, even at the very early stage, see, once you've crossed like a slightly later stage round, or you've scaled a little bit and you've got a lot of customers and you've got like a regular sort of system that has been built around it, then it's kind of easy to start thinking of impact and kind of things that are beyond the company. But one striking thing about all of these entrepreneurs, all of these founders, is the intentionality of impact from the very, very early stage itself. And that's been a very, maybe something that's been super unique across that entire set of founders that again, grateful to be working with.
So, but anything else, that you would, in your definition, right? What would you call a high conviction investment? What does the founder and the startup need to have for you to make a high conviction investment? I'm sure all of it is, but just want to understand that.
Yeah. So I guess, at the early stage, I guess the macro understanding of the landscape, the market that they're playing in, as well as the founder market fit, right? So that would be the, if I had to, do a term, if say a sort of jargonize it, I would say founder market fit. For sure. Like, I found often that the people who felt the pain and can empathize with their customers, with their other stakeholders, their employees also, end up being sort of quicker to solve a lot of problems because they often anticipate them before they occur. As opposed to sort of being just not that you can't face a problem, solve for it and then continue on the growth journey, but if there is a very, very high level of founder market fit, often there are things that maybe as a founder you're able to foresee, which maybe, if you were playing in a completely new market, you would have to go through from scratch, or you have to learn from other people's experiences. And so from a high conviction standpoint, the greater the founder market fit, obviously the greater the level of conviction in that space. If I were to wear the investor hat and look at it.
Investing is also mostly, there's a good combination of the heart and mind, right? Is you may go in with a checklist of, I want this in an investor. But at the end of the day, there is a good amount of gut feel to feel for that investment, right? How does that work from your perspective?
So this is probably different early stage versus slightly later stage, right? But early stage particularly, I think, at least I go in with this sort of mental model, if you will, that look, it's not just about whether I like having a meeting with that person or whether they like having a meeting with me. This is a relationship that's probably going to be, for better or worse, going to be around for maybe 3-5 years at a minimum. And so is there scope, do you see potential even in the very first meeting itself, when you're evaluating founders and you're meeting people, to kind of know that is possible and that is comfortably possible, where if you can cross that barrier, that hurdle in the very, very early stage, then working together becomes a hell of a lot easier further down the road. And I guess, like, I also believe I think that the longer it takes, the harder it is to build conviction. I think the best convictions in most cases are built very early. And if you're gonna have to meet somebody or understand a model, I mean, if you're gonna understand something you don't know or get to know new facts or due diligence, it's a different story. But conviction building around a particular thesis, around a particular mental model or a way of thinking, or a founder themselves, or a founder, building that conviction about an investor themselves, about whether to have them around or not as part of the story. If you're going to have to meet them 10 times in order to do it, I think it's a waste of time. I would rather say that, you're better off finding somebody else. Like, it's just a lot easier to not waste time building conviction, because it should come naturally. It should come quickly. And the best convictions always do.
That's a bit counterintuitive, right? Like, typically we expect some process to be a bit long. So would you say that investors are typically coming in, I mean, you go in with a mind that, okay, I want to probably invest in this startup, and am I looking for reasons to say no, or you're going to the startup and thinking, I want to find more yeses? What is the thought process there?
So yeah, I guess there may be a market, or there may be a thesis that I, because of whatever I've read, or because of like other folks, more intelligent folks about that space who we've spoken with, that as investors we may kind of be excited about already before we even meet a founder. So there are two ways of looking at it. Both are right. I mean, there's no right wrong in this. But like, if you've got a thesis and let's say somebody is building something very similar, attacking that same market, but their angle of approach effectively agrees with your thesis about that market already, then it just kind of becomes easier to, for the minds to meet and for that investment to take place.
Yeah.
On the contrary, if you go in with a completely blank slate, then you also get to understand, like, a very clean slate understanding of what the founder is, coming to the table with, right? Like, what their understanding of the business is your first understanding of the business or that market or that customer. So their insights become your first window into that kind of world, which on top of which then you begin to validate whether their assumptions are holding up to actual data. And then you do your first level diligence, etc., in terms of kind of figure out whether, basically the core assumptions surrounding the business are true or not. I think both approaches work. It largely depends on what kind of, like, I mean, I'm a generalist. Okay, as an investor, I think I'm a conscious generalist, because if I become too much of a specialist, then time-wise it becomes very difficult to learn about other things. So whereas if somebody is a specialist in a particular sector or a domain or a particular kind of technology, then they may already have a very deep understanding of what works and what doesn't, right? So it becomes just a little easier to evaluate, what founders are saying about that. or what problems are being solved by a particular founder.
It's pretty interesting that you talk about a thesis, right? It's
Hmm.
like, how many sectors are you looking at a time? Like, I know that it will typically, but just that, in terms of building deal flow, you get inbound, and it's based on that you're evaluating them, right? But in terms of catching the right way, right? Sometimes it's about knowing the right sectors to be in, and making sure that you don't miss that wave, right? So I'm trying to, like, how many spaces are you tracking? How should investors be looking at these opportunities? How do you do it?
So again, we're talking early stage here, right? Like angel.
Yes.
At angel stage, honestly, look, as angel investors is never going to know more about a market than the founder does, or at least about that problem that the founder is solving at that point in time. Then, I mean, you're not going to know more than them at that specific juncture, right? You could be like an expert generalist, but for like at an angel, let's say like a sub 500K kind of round that people are raising, you are solving a very specific use case and you're shipping something very specific and you're targeting a very specific segment of customers or users. At that stage, tracking spaces is far less important than tracking the right people and forming the right relationships and having the right networks. And if you instead flip that equation and kind of focus on being founder first and founder specific as opposed to market first or sector specific, then this becomes a lot easier to answer as a question, right? Because then you're agnostic to whatever they're playing in. Like, I mean, I'm not going to go to like a Professor Satya at ePlane and teach him aerospace, right? Like it's a dumb idea if I think that, I mean, he knows better than I do, but what else can I help him with that isn't part of his core competence or core skill set? That's probably the better question. If I were to meet him, that's what I would be asking him, right? Like, from a value add perspective. So, and it's the same story at Smiles. Like, what do I know about dental care? Like, I mean, I'm not a dentist, right? Like, and it's the same question with like Kaching, or like, what do I know about word of mouth influencers or like creator economy? I mean, yes, sure, we've all read the white papers, we've all read the data, we're all following the news, but beyond the publicly available, or let's say semi-publicly available information that you get from talking to people and experts in the space and building a knowledge sort of base, the specific problem being solved for is something that ultimately only the founders are going to execute, and that's what they know best, and the teams there behind those founders are going to know best. So better to go in with an attitude of how can I help versus I know this, so you should do it. In my experience, at least.
Okay. Then, are there, because I talked about this analogy of riding waves, right? Of, let's say, nobody wants to miss, say, a Flipkart or an Uber or something that walks in their door, right? Or like at least they want to chase them and then they want to write them a check, right? Does this method allow for that? So let's say I want to go out and invest in the next hottest AI startup, right? Like, does a method like that work actually, or?
Sorry, so if you're talking about FOMO as far as the, let's say, not missing out on investing in a hot deal.
Yeah, exactly. On the right deal, at least. Like, let's say in your process, right, is you want to go out and find smart entrepreneurs and work with them, right? But if they are not there in the right sector, right, I'm just trying to figure out that, let's say you are in the fintech space when, say, some of the entrepreneurs were in the fintech space, but there's an opportunity in e-commerce booming, right? Like, you don't want to miss out on that, right? So I'm trying to kind of understand that.
So, like, the market for startups is already large enough. Okay. It's not, I mean, and it's not I don't think it's a winner take all market from an investor standpoint, nor do I think it's an either or kind of market from an investor or VC standpoint, because I mean, yes, there are certain outlier use cases, outlier examples, anomalous examples that people do kind of exceptionalize and then look at as the norm, but it's really not. They're the exceptions that make the rule. It's not really, they're not the rule. like a Flipkart is not the rule. An outlier investment that becomes a $1 billion company or a $10 billion company is not the rule, right? Like it's something that it's I mean, you've got to meet. There is nothing, very little, at least, unless you are just extreme. I mean, sheer dumb luck, right? Aside from that, there is very little else that allows you to skip the process of meeting as many great founders as possible based on your preferences. And see, look, like banking, like anything else, investing is like a very people business. It's a very high trust, high touch, high people, non-scalable business. It's not a business that you're going to automate, algorithmize, and then build a product around and say, okay, let's SaaSify VC, right? It's very difficult to do that because the human element is the significant deciding factor. It's not the other way around, like in most other industries. So in that context, just meet more people, I guess.
Sure, thanks for answering the former part, right?
Yeah.
But I want to get to the other half that is rarely discussed, right? Which is the FOMO. It's like, I know this founder, I like the market, but is this the right horse to bet on, right? For lack of a better analogy, right? Is investors want to bet in the founder that will probably be in the top 1 to 3 of that industry, right? And so how do you then see that? Because one is you are also coming in from in terms of sometimes there is some level of lack of information, right? Like you may not know enough startups in the space to make sure whether this is the best startup, right? So from a competitor, in terms of evaluating with other competitors, how do you, analyze an investment?
So I wouldn't, more than evaluating competitors, I think it's about evaluating the market. Right? And at the early stage, again, I'm consciously sticking to that particular stage of investing here in terms of my answers.
Yeah.
But it's kind of, I mean, it's not so difficult to, even as kind of lay investors, for us to kind of go and figure out how much white space there is, or how much of a market is not being tapped into, or isn't really let's say addressed by a particular founder or particular set of startups. And take the case of, let's say, I mean, you take any market, right? Like, I mean, even in e-commerce, there was a time when people were saying Flipkart, Myntra, and I mean, let's say Amazon, and they were it. And if then vertical e-commerce became a thing, and suddenly you're seeing Nykaa go public, and then you are seeing social commerce, e-commerce become a thing. You're seeing Meesho, scale so massively. Then you're seeing every market's going to work in cycles, and there is no end to progress, right? Human progress ultimately is what's going to define how quickly or badly a market goes. And so, the direction of a market is not really shaped by investors or founders. It's actually shaped by consumer preferences. I mean, ultimately, customer is king, and I feel like that holds true no matter what time you enter. So if you stay invested for long enough, just like in public markets, right? Like if you get into a particular market or a sector or a thesis, and you stay invested and committed enough to that thesis for long enough, not looking to sort of ride the quick wave, but and get lucky, but commit to being true VC and true venture investing for maybe a 5-10 year horizon, then it's kind of, I mean, you would have to be very unlucky in order to not be successful.
Okay.
So FOBO, I think, is a moot point to answer your question. I feel like the fear of having the better opportunity not being invested into, I mean, are you only focusing on investing in one kind of market or one kind of, startup? No, right? Like, I mean, you're happy to there are, when you're going to go into VC or go into investing in private markets, you're going to do so in a systematic way, hopefully. And when you're doing that, instead of taking ad hoc bets here and there, you're kind of, methodically looking at a sector level, at a market level, at a geographic level, who are the players. And today that data is also publicly available enough to, very easily kind of cursorily analyze and take a call.
Thanks, Prakash. Probably like a lot of analogies are there for startup investing, right?
Sure.
People say it's like baseball where the misses don't matter, just go for the fat ones, right? Big fat ones. What is your analogy to investing? How do you think about investing?
So like we all agree, and like everybody, I'm sure, here would agree with like the fact that when the proverb, like, change is the only constant.
Yeah.
Right? Like everybody will say, yeah, absolutely, change is the only constant. But every time we think of venture investing, we think of it as, it's labeled, at least in conventional financial wisdom parlance, it's labeled the most risky business. It's the most risky investment that you can make, right? Like, I mean, it's considered, it's called the alternative investment space because it's a perceived risky asset.
Yeah.
Now, if you know that change is the only constant and technology is pretty much governing how things are changing, and you're investing in technology and technology-enabled companies that are actually enabling change, and yet you go out and believe that venture investing is a risky business, I don't know. It seems like a little bit of a paradox to me, at least. That's the case. So I would, if you wanted a one-liner in that segment, I don't know if it's a, I'm not going to compete with Warren Buffett and Charlie Munger, but I'd say, like, it is as important to invest in what doesn't change as it is to invest in what does over a given time frame.
I'd like you to elaborate further, right? Yeah, I've lost.
Yeah, like, so it's, for example, if you're let's say raising a fund and you have a venture investing thesis for a 5-year, 10-year window. There are things that are going to change in those 10 years and things that are not going to change in those 10 years. Like, for example, no one's going to come and say, I don't want to use the internet.
Yeah.
Like, no one's going to come and say that I don't want healthier food. No one's going to come and say that I don't want better quality air or climate in the space where I live. But there are also people, you don't know exactly how climate's going to change. You don't exactly know how, like, what kind of healthy food they're going to prefer, what the tastes are going to be in, let's say, year 6 or year 7. The cadence of that growth is not visible, and rightly so, because you can't predict it so much as you can only create it. But the importance of understanding the balance between those two things, like there will be things that change and there will be things that don't, ultimately is what defines your understanding of risk as an investor, especially in private markets, because you're investing in frontier tech, you're investing in things that are new. You're not investing in something where there's so much data already available about it. Like, the objectivity to subjectivity ratio is heavily, disproportionately skewed in favor of subjectivity than in any other asset class. So, because it's very people driven. So the whole understanding of, change as a concept and embracing it and then going into this, as opposed to saying, I'm going to be safe, quote unquote, and invest in only the things that don't change. In the long run, you will not have greater risk adjusted returns.
I think Jeff Bezos has something on that line. I think he mentioned.
Yeah. So he was talking from an Amazon standpoint, right? Yeah.
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 Sure. So I'm not going to ask you on market timing this time. I'm skipping that.
Sure.
So, I think, I've got a good idea about, the questions that I want to ask on specifically on the mindset part, right?
Sure.
So I want to go into the investment process, right? And you told me that the fewer meetings, if you're not able to build a conviction, then that's not there, right?
Yeah.
So I want to know, like, why do you say? So the universe of startups is much bigger. You would notice a lot more startups that are coming in, right?
Yeah.
What is the reason you say yes for a first call? For the first call to them. What is the reason? Why do you say yes for the first call with the founders? Like, in terms of the funnel, right? There are a lot of, I want to understand your process, right? You tend to have 1 or 2 calls with them, and then you said you do the first diligence and stuff, right? But I'm guessing there are more startups which are outside of that funnel, right? Which you just looked at them and would not even say, not even take a call with them. But like something would have clicked for a particular startup, right? Which I think is the start of the conviction building process. So I want to know why you say yes.
So it's okay. So I say yes to everything. I can't say no to. I'm
You're
serious.
gonna have a lot of
I'm not trying to
tautologies
be
in this.
facetious. I'm not trying to be facetious. What I mean by that is that, like, if a founder reaches out, or if I get the chance to meet somebody, first, obviously, I have to assess. I look at 3-4 things. One is, even before I've met the founder, this is right. One is, do I understand this? Second, am I invested in something else that is already similar to this? Which obviously precludes me from that investment. So these are the reasons why I would potentially say no. Like, if I don't understand it, or if like I've already done something very similarly that could potentially conflict, or if maybe there's like if I really feel like this is so far out, or geographically or regulatorily different, that I can't add any value beyond just sort of signing a check, or I objectively I'm like at a loss for bandwidth in order to maintain a relationship with the founder or founders, then that could also be one of the reasons why I wouldn't meet with them. But if it's not one of these 3-4 questions, and the answer to these questions is not no, then I would love to meet them. Like, why would I not?
Okay. Good. And once you set up this one, right? How does your homework look like just before the first call? Like, how do you research them? I'm sure maybe it's also you have an understanding of the thesis and it kind of matches that. But like, what kind of homework should an investor do before the first call?
So look, I don't think it's a call specific homework, honestly. I feel like it should be a market specific, knowledge specific homework, and very fortunate to have the time today, honestly, to spend at least 60-70% of the time that I spend on this, like reading and learning and consuming information and assimilating data. And I mean about everything I can get my hands on. I do not mean very specifically in terms of restricting my curiosity to a particular sector, or a particular kind of person, or whatever else. Generally, anything and everything that is changing and that is technology related, I will happily consume if I can get the chance to. And as a result of which, a significant percentage of my time goes into that. But barring that, so because of that, already there is a certain worldview. Like, if there is a certain amount of information or data that's already in your head, then there's like you've already got a certain worldview, and you've already met enough people, right? Like, to have conversations and validate those assumptions about. So by the time you meet a founder, it's almost like just basically validating their assumptions against your worldview and seeing if their worldview is better or worse. Or let's say, if there is at least some level of mapping that you can do with regard to the minds that are meeting in a particular, in a particular meeting. That's it. Because if you do, at the early stage, especially at an angel seed stage, like if you've done founder evaluation and you kind of referenceability, their backgrounds, you know where they work, etc. And you also know what thesis they're solving for, what customer set they're solving for, how much founder market fit there is, etc. And you ask them very basic questions that are pointed and sharp, but are very basic in their nature during the first call or two itself. Then mostly you get like at least a 60-70% confidence level on what your conviction is, if there is conviction at all, and if there is, how much and why. So and you'll be able to spot the spike, basically, to say, look, this is the one exceptional thing that is crazily good about this particular founder or the startup, etc. And then you kind of take it from there.
Right. Sure. To the audience here, we have about another 15 more minutes.
Okay.
So if you have some questions, you can put it on this one. You can put it on the chat. Or if there's a Q&A there. Yeah, there's a Q&A there. Yeah, if you have any questions, you can put it on chat. I will ask Vignesh as well. Yeah. Okay,
Cool.
Vignesh. I want to know, what's the fastest you've done in terms of knowing a founder and then writing a check? I want you to tell me your investment like that.
60 minutes.
Wow, really?
Yeah.
I need to hear
Probably,
that, right? I need to hear that.
probably even less.
Which startup was it, and how did that call go?
I don't want to say. I don't want to name the founder.
Maybe
now.
not name them, but what kind of really clicked, right? What kind of really clicked there?
I mean, it was the startup is a very binary kind of question to answer, right? Like, I mean, it's not a question of the only question to answer during the meeting was not why will it work or if it would work. It was more about why should it be now that it works.
Yeah. Okay.
And that was answered in the because the team was validated, the model was validated, thesis was done. Then very little. I mean, it would have been an insult to the founder's intelligence as well as mine actually to have continued that conversation on any other line aside from that one question.
Okay. And did you know these founders prior to that?
I knew of them.
I didn't
know them. I knew of them. I didn't know them directly.
Okay. And this came in through a network reference, was it?
Definitely. Yeah.
I lost you, Vignesh.
No, it did. It did come through.
It
did come through a very known reference. Yeah.
Okay. And I want to talk about timing also, right? As now that you brought it up, how should investors look at market timing, right? It's a question that is not really very difficult to define or very difficult. It's a kind of a difficult question to answer, right? So how do you evaluate from a market timing for a startup?
So startup market timing, early stage market timing is really like what as venture investors and as founders, I think we have the luxury of creating that, right? Because if you get in early enough into a company, like there are only so many stages you'll be considered early. So getting in one of those stages basically results in better outcomes for everybody. So timing wise, it's not like, I'm assuming, it's not typical for like angel investors to invest at like Series C. So I guess the sooner you can get in, the better is just the thumb rule. As far so like no other timing issue to really necessary. To consider, honestly, unlike public markets where there are no moving averages, graphs, and all that. Right? It's like a very the only way for this graph is up because it starts at 0.
Yeah. My next question is, based out of one of the audience members. Is I'm just modifying that. That's a question by Arvind. Is what are some of the biggest or worst mistakes that you had to learn from?
So not doubling down on a winner.
Okay.
No, because because growth is exponential in this space, the real returns, the real sort of impact, actually, forget financially alone, I'm saying even as an investor that you're able to have just at a conviction level as well as in a relationship with the founder, is to not be able to, for whatever reason, if you have the capital, do not be afraid of doubling down or tripling or quadrupling or quintupling down on a winner. Because if something works in this space, it'll really work. And you don't want to not be part of that. That would be one of my biggest mistakes. For sure. The other is, I guess, one of the other mistakes was, again, I will not name the startup, but I fortunate enough to again be invested there, but I got in a little bit later than I would have liked to. Possibly because at the initial stage, even though I met the founders and I really, really liked them, for whatever reason, I just felt like I didn't understand that science or the model behind it, the sort of the science behind it deeply enough. And I mean, that was a very costly error, actually. I probably should have just said, look, anyway, I'm not going to know more about this than the founders do. So how does it make a difference? And I should have committed earlier itself as opposed to later, but it is what it is. So, this is just touching on the previous point that we were discussing earlier about, not investing in things that one doesn't understand, but also the extent of one's understanding need not be as deep as sort of like a PhD in a subject.
This is a question from B. Patnaik. His question is on how do you evaluate basic operational and financial understanding of founders? So do you give a lot of importance especially for first-time founders, right? Just curious to know how you evaluate that.
See, so there are two parts to like an early stage story, right? There is the data, and then there's the narrative that you craft around that data. Now, if there is not, like, your financial and operational details are very much the data. If the founders do not have a firm grasp of the data that is being generated by their own company, their own firm, then it's kind of difficult to envision. I mean, we'll put it this way: it's a very learnable skill, very easily acquirable skill. But if they already have it, it just speeds up your time to market. And when I say time to market, I mean it's also in terms of presentability, it also in terms of like ability to go and articulate this narrative in public, talking to sort of investors, being active in other markets, etc., and also strategically, being able to change the narrative depending on the flow of how the market is actually responding to the initial product that's being launched, etc. So definitely super important, super crucial, no doubt.
Now I want to come about false positives, right? You looked at something strongly and you thought that this was a good investment, but then it fell off, right? Have you seen any like that? Like probably like a couple of weeks before the investment, like before you could say yes, you like strongly you were for the investment, but then you decided not to go, right? Have you had?
Never.
Oh man, okay.
No cold feet. Please wear socks.
No cold
feet. Yeah.
Right.
No, I mean, look, I mean, it's a request. I mean, honestly, I mean, and the best investors definitely know this. Founding a company is one of the most uncertain things that a founder can do, that a person can do, right? Like there is just so much uncertainty surrounding that one event, that one process of founding a company, being a CEO, building something from scratch. And in that kind of uncertain environment, when we as investors, we are seeking to put money and then de-risk that capital. So too do founders want to commit time and then de-risk their time. The easiest way to de-risk their time is to provide them a modicum of certainty. So the basics, like, this is just basic financial investing hygiene, right? Like it's not even something, at least, I mean, I would never even think twice about it. Like if a commitment is given, a word is given, integrity is absolutely everything. So like no cold feet, last minute reversals.
Oh, no, not about, not in where like you said yes and then you back out, not about that. Where the first two calls, you were moving towards a nest, but then it kind of, then you said something, some new information came out or you saw it from a different angle and then you had to.
There has been one time when obviously during due diligence, if the claims made by the founders do not hold up to scrutiny, then of course, that is par for the course, right? I mean, I mean, it shouldn't happen very often. Hasn't happened very often with me also. I mean, out of all of the companies, it has happened only once, touch wood, but still it has happened. Yeah. Obviously not going to name company.
Yeah. Okay. Is there an innocent that got away? Like you would have wanted to write a check, but then you either said no, or like, I mean, obviously some of the ones will close much faster than you would want to, but
Yeah.
some investment where you said no, but then you kind of then said, oh, I wish I had written that check. Like Bessemer's anti-portfolio, right? I want to understand if you have an anti-portfolio.
I do have an anti-portfolio, but I mean, I don't know whether it's a good thing or a bad thing, but my anti-portfolios, all of the founders, I unfortunately did not have the privilege of meeting yet.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, ones that I did want to meet or companies that I did want to be a part of, but thankfully, I mean, good for them, of course, that, they kind of closed their round so quickly, or for whatever reason, just kind of, moved ahead incredibly quickly. So, I mean, that's classically what happens, right? When you're talking to, like, especially the, really, really amazing founders. Capital already is a commodity for everybody, but effectively, essentially for them, it's like a, the demand is much greater than supply.
Yeah, one of the attendees has asked for founder versus idea, right?
Founder,
I think you
founder 10 times out of 10.
10 times.
In fact, I see the question. There's actually something about a school dropout. One of our founders, my founders, is actually a college dropout, and he's probably one of the most insightful founders you could meet. I don't think dropping out of school by itself is a prerequisite for starting up. I think they are mutually correlated events, but more than just dropping out of school, I think figuring out why they dropped out of school or college is a much better way to evaluate the context of investment.
I hope this conversation was, as interesting for you as it was for me, especially in terms of, kind of understanding the mindset, right? Is any, just before we close, right? And I think, let me just check. I think one more question is there. Yeah, this is, do you need a proper presentation or? And I'm gonna.
So this happens all the time. I mean, like sometimes a lot of the times it's a deck. Mostly the deck helps not just the investor, but also like the founder to crystallize their ideas so that there's a very clear flow through which they've actually thought through it. And then the deck forms the sort of basis for a larger sort of, let's say, operational infra in the background. But I have invested on the back of one pages as well.
Okay.
I mean, the founder, if it's the most important, then the deck or the one pager is largely like an accompanying collateral, right? It's not really like the primary criterion that drives the investment.
Yeah, I think even Canva founder did like a actual, instead of deck, they actually bought like cards on which they printed and came and showed, which is very interesting story.
Yeah. I mean, you don't have to be that creative, but yeah.
Yeah. Any closing words, Vignesh? Something that the audience can take away, something that has you've always wanted to share, right? Something that my questions have probably missed out. What would you like to give the audience here?
Please angel invest more, and definitely continue supporting any founder on their journey that you do meet, because it is probably one of the hardest jobs in the world.
Just before you go, one other question that I kind of missed out was, a lot of times you're also investing in networks and groups, right?
Yeah.
How does the dynamics work there?
Meaning?
In a sense, as in like you expect your, let's say it's a four or five people investing together as a part of it. I'm sure you would have co-invested with your, say somebody like a Java Capital or somebody, right? So
yes.
Who are good friends of yours.
Yeah.
How does the conviction work there? Is it like, if let's say if your friends is doing it, are you like willing to go on that conviction, or like how does that work? Like,
so
how do you kind of split the kind of work there? Yeah.
One of the conscious questions I actually avoid asking founders, at least until I have already made a commitment, is who else is investing? And that is for two reasons. One is I want to sleep peacefully at night. I want to know. No, as in I want to know why what my conviction is based on or standing on.
Mm-hmm.
The other is also, as a founder, if I would empathize with the founder and put myself in their shoes and look at me or any other investor, I want to be answering first principles questions about my business, about my model, about my thesis, about my team, about my eligibility to be solving this problem. I want to answer every question, however much in depth, no matter what. But I definitely don't want somebody to be riding on the coattails of somebody else's conviction without having their own original conviction. There are often times where, for example, shared conviction does occur. And even, taking the example of Java, there are investments with Java that I have not done. There are investments with Java that I've also done. And, I have freely, openly discussed these things with Vinod as well, right? Like, from a investing standpoint, it's a syndicate. And, when we discuss an investment, I openly share my thoughts on it, whether or not I have conviction, and if so, why. And as does he. And then if there is a shared conviction, then great. If not, there isn't. But also with Java, it has only been 3 investments. Like, I've not made the vast majority of investments have been direct, thankfully. So it's largely been founder to kind of investor relationship.
Nice. Yeah, very nice. Thanks a lot, Vignesh. Great having you here.
Likewise, thanks to all of you for sort of having me here and sort of patiently listening to my rambling. Yeah, I hope I was able to at least not be. I hope this wasn't a complete waste of everyone's afternoons. With regard to talking startups. But yeah, thanks a lot.
Asif is asked for your email ID if in case they want to apply.
Sure. Vignesh@spoonfeed.co. Should I just type it on the chat?
Yeah, sure.
Thanks, Varada. Thanks, Vignesh. This was indeed insightful. Thanks everyone for joining. The session will also be live on YouTube soon. So yeah, all of it will be shared with you all via email. Thanks for joining, and yeah, have a good day.
Thanks, folks. Thanks a lot. Really.
You too.